So thank you so much for that. And just for the record, would you please state your title and profession for the panel here?
Sure. I'm Dr. Jeff Michael. I'm an economist, professor and director of the Business Forecasting Center at the University of the Pacific. I've been working on Delta issues for about 5 years as a consultant for the Delta Protection Commission, among others.
Thank you.
Invitation. Before I start my comments, just because I'm having studied BDCP financing and high-speed rail financing in detail, just to clarify some of the numbers that have been flying around here related to those. The high-speed rail financing cost estimate of $68 billion does include inflation, but does not include financing costs, and there are not as many revenue plans associated with that financing plan. The BDCP $25 billion figure is current dollars, so it does not include inflation like high-speed rail does, and does not also include financing costs. So the $68 billion figure includes both inflation and financing costs, and is not really directly comparable to the high-speed rail costs. I mean, this isn't, the cost estimates are not equal to high-speed rail. It is less than that. However, I think it is fair to say a comparable figure would be more than 25 billion, or somewhere in the middle. So I'm going to focus on 3 issues in my comments here. One is about cost allocation, and specifically is this project delivering value to agricultural contractors and what that means for the financing of the project and whether they should go forward. Second, I'm talking about BDCP and whether it's shifting risk amongst the state or whether it's reducing risk for the state. And third, I'm going to go in a little more detail about the BDCP economic studies that Anton scratched the surface on. First of all, about financial feasibility. You look right in Department of Water Resources' own guidebooks, and it defines that financial feasibility requires a project has benefits that exceeds costs for every single participant. They're allocated costs for every participant. To date, BDCP hasn't provided a cost allocation amongst the agencies, and this is a really difficult problem that they're sort of working on behind closed doors. And so without that, they cannot claim that they've even shown financial feasibility for the project. If you can't under one cost allocation, you've got to adjust it somehow and see if it works out for that. But the problem with the BDCP is that the tunnels just have simply an absurd cost for agriculture for irrigation project, even for lucrative almonds. And the reality is that the majority of the water exported for the Delta is from agriculture. The BDCP working assumption to this date has been all agencies are going to pay an equal amount per unit of water received via the tunnels. That means agriculture would bear the majority of the costs of the tunnels. And that assumption is what's behind Metropolitan Water District telling its urban ratepayers this is going to cost you $5 a month. The question is that feasible for the agricultural users? And to date, BDCP hasn't looked specifically at them. Everything they put out is sort of mush the benefits of urban and ag together to sort of hide this issue. But I think there's real concerns about whether BDCP is good for agriculture in the Central Valley as a whole, not just the Delta. For example, the recent presentation to Westlands Water District by Citigroup and DWR that was the subject of that Mercury News article, estimated tunnel debt service would be between $1.3 billion and $2 billion per year, in contrast to the $1.1 billion figure in Chapter 8 of the BDCP. Agriculture's share of this would be about 60% or $1 billion per year. That's an enormous cost for agriculture to bear for water supplies and conveyance, and completely out of scale with anything that's been done before. If you look at the BDCP Environmental Impact Report or statement, it says that in an average year, water exports will increase between 0, nothing, that's the low end of the range, and 800,000 acre feet per year. As the administration said earlier, last year their best case scenarios last year they think they would have gotten another 800,000 acre feet exported with the deltas. This year 0. In a really wet year, more than 1 million acre feet. That's the best case scenario. But just do some simple math. Divide that debt service by the best case of 800,000 acre feet of additional yield per year. You get a range of between $1,500 and $2,500 per acre foot. That's pretty steep for agriculture prices, pretty steep for an urban agency. If you consider inflation and some additional water quality benefits that urban agencies might get, I can see how this is, it's a marginal but feasible project for the urban agencies compared to their current alternatives. The costs are really nonsensical for agriculture compared to the benefits. And as lots of people have already mentioned, in a drought year like this, that'd be $1 billion in costs for no extra water. And I'm very concerned about the Central Valley economy this year, and I really can't think of anything worse we could do to them than to give them $1 billion of debt service for a project that isn't helping significantly with drought relief. Wouldn't say it's no help. It might help with some carryover storage, but not a lot. But BDCP basically is yet to demonstrate the plan makes sense for farming or to propose any reallocations of costs. I don't see how investing in BDCP is a profitable investment for farmers unless this cost share goes way down. They can prove me wrong by showing the income statements for farms with BDCP and without BDCP, and that the profits go up with BDCP. My estimate is that cost share would have to go down to 10 or 20% before we could even start to make sense for agriculture. So what's that cost shift going to do? If it would be necessary to do such a cost shift, what's that mean for taxpayers, ratepayers, and the economy, or these allocation issues? One, bond financing may require a taxpayer backstop because investors are going to be concerned about the same things that I've talked about the financial feasibility for some of the agencies. And given that, I think it's really past time for the legislature to see a much more detailed finance plan. Second is the cost could be reallocated from farms to urban ratepayers. That would have big impacts on those urban ratepayers. If those costs were reallocated, their costs could be 2 to 3 times higher than what they've been told, even under the current cost estimates. And you have to start questioning whether the project then makes sense for some of the urban agencies if you have that kind of cost shift. The costs are unlikely to be reallocated to urban agencies without some reallocation of the water supplies, and this is another part of my concern about the Central Valley. The BDCP EIR, and I've not read all 30-some thousand pages of it, but I've read part of it, and I did find a part buried a couple sentences in one of the paragraphs that raises the possibility of ag to urban transfers as part of these new water contracts they're discussing that would be part of financing the BDCP. So the BDCP could cause water to be moved out of Central Valley agriculture into urban areas to help pay that debt service, and obviously that would have economic impacts in the Central Valley. So that's something that I think we should get to the bottom of and understand what the potential for that is. Second point was risk reduction or risk shifting. Water agencies to date and the water contractors have said they're willing to pay for BDCP despite that it's not increasing water supplies over the current levels because it reduces their risk of a future loss. The BDCP would provide assurances and reduce those water exports risks that has value. It would prevent them, or at least reduce the ability of them being asked to contribute more money or water in the future to help endangered species. But I do not believe that the BDCP does much to reduce the state's overall risk. As Anton said, there's a lot of uncertainty about how BDCP will work. This isn't a scientific hearing, but there's certainly uncertainty about these habitat measures and the tunnels themselves and how the impacts on species. And under BDCP, the risk of failure doesn't fall on those agencies. That's their assurance. It falls on others. It could fall on upstream water interests. It could fall on in delta interests. It could fall on the environment or on the species themselves, or it could fall right back on taxpayers. And considering that most of the habitat elements of BDCP, and I would say just about all the elements of BDCP that are actually going to help the endangered species are financed by taxpayers, the question is, particularly the state's taxpayers, what regulatory assurance do the taxpayers receive for their investment? I don't see much here, and I see that they are actually paying for the things that would reduce risk to the endangered species and also receiving risk in that transaction. So it's not clear that that's a good deal for taxpayers. Third is about the economic analysis and is what BDCP done so far sort of convincing and sound on the benefit cost side. I would argue, if an agency administration can make a proposal as divisive and controversial as these tunnels, and they certainly are all that, you better be able to show an overwhelming statewide economic case for the project. And you better make sure that that accepts all the best practices and your own guidelines is very conservative in the analysis. Well, in the case of BDCP, DWR simply ignored economic analysis for years and said they didn't need to do it and weren't going to do benefit cost analysis. As the pressure dialed up, that more recently they have released some stuff. I recently wrote a 16-page review of this report for Delta counties. It's on the web. I'm not going to go through it all here, but I'm going to highlight a few of the problems and go beyond what Anton said. And to the credit of the consultants at BDCP, they've already acknowledged a few errors in that work and are working on revised draft now. But here's just a couple of the problems with it. One is what I would call is they commit the original error of the high-speed rail business plan, and Anton referred to this as that they've made a huge overstatement of future demand for water. It ignores all the current growth forecasts that have been provided by the State Department of Finance, the current growth forecasts in use by local planning agencies in the water receiving agency areas, and is utilizing sort of these old pre-recession forecasts. They're estimating about 5 million more water users in Southern California than the state DOF is now projecting over that time. So that's the only scenario they're looking at. So that's really a driving part of the benefits. Second, it sort of assumes water agencies aren't going to invest in more alternative water supplies or conservation than they have in progress right now, even if they don't build the tunnels. A simple way to say that is analysis assumes that the agencies like Metropolitan will ignore their own board-approved plans for investments in the case that the tunnels aren't built. That the agencies will sort of act as incompetent do-nothings for decades. And they've made a statement that BDCP will preserve over 1 million jobs, I think 1.4 million. By my calculation, 1 million of those come directly from the assumption that these water agencies will just do nothing if they don't get the tunnels. They won't invest in alternative supplies. They'll just allow shortages to occur for industry that are highly unlikely. Third, principles of economic analysis suggest require that tunnels themselves be justified independently. And this analysis constantly commingles the habitat measures from the tunnels. Even though the habitat's being paid for by taxpayers, if the BDCP goes away today and the tunnels aren't built, there's a lot of good stuff in those habitat measures. And a lot of those better measures have funding that don't depend on the tunnels, and we can expect those benefits to go forward anyway. In fact, some people, I've seen polling that says a water bond is more likely to pass, and they'll be more likely to have funding for these projects if the tunnel proposal goes away. And finally, and perhaps most importantly, the economic analysis done by BDCP assumes that water exports without the tunnel is going to be 25% below the level assumed in their environmental documents. So the environmental documents say without the tunnels, things will continue on sort of as they are today, about 4.7 million acre feet. And then in their economic analysis, they say, oh no, it's going to get much worse. It'll be 3 point something million acre feet. This is a problem. If you are producing analysis for environmental purposes that says water exports are going to be really high without the tunnels, and then for your economic purposes, you adopt a completely different assumption that says water supply will be really low without the tunnels, that inconsistency is a problem. And I've been questioning consultants, administration officials about this constantly, And the answer that they've given me, they don't say that this is good science or policy analysis. They say that in their view this is permissible under CEQA, NEPA, and the ESA. Now, I don't know, I'll leave that to the lawyers. Maybe it is, I'm sure a lawyer will bring that up in the future if this goes to court. But the core issue here is sort of policy analysis and what's best for the state. We know the trade-off between environment and water exports is critical, and that I think the people of the state would like to see some consistent assumptions under these all these sorts of analysis. The fact that they can't get a positive benefit-cost ratio without making these sorts of changes is really a red flag about the economic value of the project. Thank you.
Michael, the lack of cost allocation information seems a serious omission in the BDCP. Could you tell us how the administration might provide us with this information? Your suggestion?
I suggest that they provide. I mean, it's an issue that they haven't resolved, and they don't. I think, and it's a controversial issue, and it's a lightning rod issue within the agencies, and so I think they don't want to. You know, they're hesitant to put something out there. You know, until they haven't negotiated. But it's a real serious. It's a real serious issue, and I think that we'd all benefit if the documents they put out at least put out some working assumptions that are a little more realistic, and that the analysis they put out would break things down more amongst the ag users and the urban users, so that people can see how the benefits and costs work out for each party, and then have sort of rational discussion.